on to Natasha's presentation on the Dance of Death. I'm just going to check that Natasha's there. Natasha, you can unmute and say hello if you like.
It's worked. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, who am I? I'm Natasha. I'm a research student at the University of Wales at Lampeter. And in my BA, my dissertation focused on the macabre arts in late medieval Northern Europe. Nice long title. But one feature of those macabre arts is the Dance of Death, also known as the Dance Macabre, the Totem Dance, the Danza General della Muerte, il Ballo di Morte. Every area, every country seems to have had its own name. The most famous painting of the dance in England was that at St Paul's Cathedral, obviously Old St Paul's Cathedral in London. And it was so famous in England that the dance was generally known in England as Paul's Dance, Paul's Dance. Here in the first slide, we have two lovely energetic musical skeletons from the Danse Macabre des Femmes, which we'll encounter again a bit later. And the subtitle, or here supertitle I suppose, is Coming Ready or Not, because death is inevitable, it's ubiquitous, it's the whole point of the Dance of Death, and there's no getting away from it. Okay, so what is the Dance of Death? At its most basic, it shows a procession of characters, live and dead, usually in pairs, one dead for each living person. The living are of all types, wealthy, poor, powerful, weak, male, female, old, young. The dance sometimes has a preacher at the extreme left who introduces the whole thing, and he's often followed by one or more skeletal musicians, such as the chaps in our first slide. Then come the couples, most often beginning with the higher status, the Pope, the Emperor, the King, and moving on to include craftsmen, merchants, the poor, disabled, even babies. Corpses are very often lively, with knees raised, arms flung wide, engaged in an energetic dance, while the living, if they move at all, are more sedate. There is a background, often a generic rural scene, but in the case of the Lebec Dance, the town is shown in recognisable detail, probably making it more immediate to its viewers. They can see themselves in that situation. Dances are most often found painted on the interior walls of churches throughout Northern Europe, but there is a group of exterior dances in Northern Europe, perhaps the most famous of which, is this lower one at Pinzolo. And there are also books of hours which contain the Dance of Death as illustrations to the Office of the Dead, as well as dances collected into books with other related subjects, such as the Legend of the Three Living and the Three Dead. Such books may be printed, as is the original Danse Macabre des Femmes, or in manuscript form. The illustration here above is the Reviled Dance of Death, painted in the 15th century by Bernd Notke, and now incomplete, although it was originally about 30 feet longer. It was damaged, it's just been damaged over time. The illustrations in the Reviled Dance are taken from Bernd Notke's earlier painting in Lubeck, which was sadly destroyed in 1942 by bombing. In the case of both of these dances, the dancers move from right to left, but the whole thing is meant to be read from left to right. Now, other dances work the other way around. It doesn't really matter, but if you start with the preacher, whichever end is at, and work along there, starting with the highest status characters down to the lowest status at the end away from the preacher. Although the living in the dance are all distinguishable from each other by their dress and by their attributes, the dead are all remarkably similar. One may hold a scythe, another a coffin, some may have trailing shrouds, but there's little difference between them. In this similarity, the self of the living is destroyed. The community of the living may be made up of individuals, but not so the dead. These are no flimsy phantoms. They're physical, grasping beings with power over the living. The living are found engaged in their occupations or dressed according to their station, demonstrating that in the midst of life we truly are in death. They engage with their captors and sometimes with the viewer in a three-way interaction. Now, this is part of an altarpiece for Saint Bertin painted by Simon Marmion in the 15th century. And in the background, we can clearly see people looking at a dance of death. On the left, there are two men looking up at a dance of death painted on the upper part of a wall. And the man on the left seems to be describing it or explaining it to his partner or colleague or whoever he is. And on the right, I don't know if you can make him out, there's a man kind of relaxing, sitting on a little bench, leaning against the wall and presumably contemplating the dance, which goes all the way around this little enclosure. Now, to fully understand the dance, we need to look at its uncle, the legend of the three living and the three dead. Now, I say uncle because the dance descends not in a straight line from the legend, but at a sideways step. The legend first appears in 1280 in the text Les Dits des Trois Vifs et des Trois Morts, written by Baudouin de Condé, although he may have been writing from oral tradition. Shortly before this poem was written in 1274, the doctrine of purgatory had first been formalized by the church, outlining what was to come to those who were neither almost impossibly good, bound for heaven, or irredeemably bad, destined for hell. The legend tells that three young nobles or kings, here on the left, out for an enjoyable day's hawking, encountered three animated cadavers. In our chosen representation of the legend from the English Delisle Psalter of the early 14th century, the characters are shown above a Middle French version of the poem. Above the miniature, though, are phrases in Middle English, which give the gist of what each character says. I'm reading from left to right, trouble with right and left. They say, the three living say in their turn, I am afraid, lo, what I see, methinks these be devils three. And then the dead respond with, I was well fair, such shall you be. And lastly, and most importantly, for God's sake, beware by me. The last phrase is crucial. The cadavers are warning the careless young men to mend their ways if they want to reduce their stay in purgatory. And the outward-facing skeleton on the far right, who I absolutely love, includes us, the viewers, in his statement. For God's love, beware by me. The theme of as I am, so shall you be continues to be found on gravestones into at least the 19th century. I haven't mentioned the many plagues which affect Europe during the late medieval and early modern periods. The first appearance of the Black Death in the mid-14th century was after the earliest examples of the macabre arts. And although it can't be denied that plagues had an impact on the medieval psyche, in this case, people didn't need a constant reminder of the omnipresence of death. Average life expectancy was reduced by the high number of infant mortalities. Many women died in childbirth. A small cut could lead to a fatal infection. Communicable disease was only one cause among many. Having mentioned purgatory, I must explain a little more about it. Such was the strength of belief in the medieval period that it was felt that somewhere was needed for the great majority of people to go after death. It was obvious. Saints would go straight to heaven, and clearly those guilty of serious sins went straight to hell. But what about the ordinary people? The innkeeper who'd sold watered ale, or the woman who thought too much of her appearance? These minor sins would land almost anyone in hell if there was no alternative. So in 1274, a papal decree was made formalizing purgatory, a place for the dead to expiate their sins, from where they would be released at the day of judgment. This could be tens of thousands of years, and the living who prayed for the souls of the dead were promised a reduction in tariff for doing so. Thus, the Delisle Psalter dead were not only trying to help the three young men, but probably hoping to be remembered and prayed for. Purgatory may seem very similar to hell. The torments are the same, but in hell there is no hope, and that's probably the greatest torment. The suffering souls in this painting represent various transgressive men, a tonsured priest, a cardinal, a king, a pope at the far right, just at the other side of that lovely red devil. The Dance of Death never shows us what happens next. This apparent lack of resolution could be considered unsatisfactory today, but to the medieval Christian, it would be taken as read. They knew where they were bound. Yes. This representation is of the site of the earliest known dance mural in the graveyard of Les Innocents in Paris, created between 1424 to 5. The dance can be seen through the arches of the cloister painted on the walls. You can see above them skulls and bones, because this mural faced onto a graveyard. This is the earliest known reference to the dance of 1424. Slightly earlier, in Spain, we have a poem, Danza General de la Muerte, but there's not much left to really know how that was portrayed. The Paris mural, along with its graveyard, was destroyed in 1786 in an act of town planning. Fortunately, it had been recorded, as we see here, and here we can appreciate it in its original setting, facing onto the graveyard, surrounded by the bones of the charnel house. The area was not only a burial ground. Preachers were often to be found addressing crowds, using the background of the mural to some point, and the whole surrounding area was a busy one with markets and commerce. This was a mural to be seen by everyone, differing from the private contemplation of books of hours, where the three living and the dead were often found, only really available to the wealthy. In the legend, the three living are always wealthy and powerful. In the dance, all human life is there, with no respect for the wealthy or powerful. There is an overlap between the legend and the dance. Here we see on the left a pope, emperor, and king confronted by their equals in cadaverous forms, in a typical three living and the three dead found in a book of hours. On the right, a pope and a bishop are led away to their final dance by their dead companions. In the second, the cadavers are not specific. One carries a coffin and another a scythe, but they have no religious attributes or any other attribute. But there's no way of telling what these two characters did in life. There are more differences than similarities between the two tropes. The greatest visible difference is in length. The dance can include more than 30 couples dancing the way to the afterlife, while the legend concerns only 6 characters. The legend offers the hope of redemption. It's not too late for the careless young men to leave behind their luxurious lives. The medieval viewer would have understood the words of the dead, offering a chance to shorten the time of purgatory. In the dance, this hope is missing. What's done is done, and it's too late for the living participants to change their fate. The only hope for them is that those left behind will pray for their souls. The earliest legend predates the earliest dance by about a century, although they coexist for a while. So who is represented in the dance? As we've said, all human life is here, young and old, rich and poor. A large number of the doomed are clerics of one kind or another. A pope and every other religious person is here. They're just as much subject to death and judgment as anyone else, and often portrayed in a less than flattering light. Dancers include monks and nuns of various orders. In the wall painting of Mallet Grenet at the top right, we see a cardinal in his red robes. In the centre, with a king, a bishop, and a pope. Also, we see on the left the wet nurse, hardly a wealthy woman, and indeed, in the text that goes with this miniature, we hear that the baby is also going to die. And below her, the praetor and the jailer, so another low status pair of people. Now, I said we'd look a little bit more at the Danse Macabre des Femmes, and these 5 people are taken from that book. Women seldom appear in the dance. They first appear at St. Paul's in London in the poem translated from the original French by John Lydgate, a Shropshire man, which accompanies the mural. Late 15th century France, however, produced the Danse Macabre des Femmes, in which all the living except the preacher are women, and the little girl refers to her captor as she, which doesn't, to my knowledge, happen anywhere else. Otherwise, the dance is representative of all society, including tradeswomen and all types of nobility. And usually the women's dance appeared first as a printed book in 1486, followed by a very beautiful illuminated manuscript, and the wet nurse on the previous slide was from that manuscript. The Danse Macabre des Femmes is the longest of all the dances, having 36 living protagonists. By no means misogynistic, it doesn't focus on the supposedly female sins of gossip and vanity, but is often sympathetic to women in transgressive situations, such as the prostitute and the witch, both shown in this book. One would expect all the living to be horrified. After all, an animated skeleton has just appeared to lead them to purgatory. Indeed, most have negative reactions, horror, sadness, worry, but a few are content. Either they've lived a long and fulfilled life and are tired, or they're in such pain and distress they'd rather get it over with. In the Danse Macabre des Femmes, the little girl on the left in the lovely purple dress asks her mother to look after her doll. The nun at the bottom seems resigned to death. The village woman at the top is relieved to reach the end of her impoverished life. The old woman in the middle says God is her only comfort, and after rain, that is a long life, comes fair weather. The female fool on the right in the red says, "Trim, pretty ladies, hear what I have to say to you. Leave your foolishness now, because you will certainly die. Since I've done no wrong, I haven't lied, I ask forgiveness for those who stay behind, and I ask paradise from God. I can't ask for a finer gift." Unfortunately, the faces aren't all that demonstrative. I wish they'd done something about that. I'd like to see the fool smiling, actually. Oh yes. Sadly, although we do know that the dance was performed, there are a few details of such performances. One song remains to us, Ad Mortem Festinamus, found in this is Spanish, Libre Vermeil de Montserrat, I think, of 1399, with words and music, as you can see here, as well as a miniature of a cadaver in his tomb. I rather like him. The words are gloomy, we hasten towards death, but the tune is quite jolly. Next. Yes, I referred earlier to the Lebec Dance, and we have this illustration of it. And we can see the cadavers are performing a very high-stepping, perhaps peasant-style dance, while the living are understandably slower, their gait more sedate. Indeed, they often seem not to be moving at all. Presumably, they don't really want to hasten towards death. Some turn towards their captor, others turn away. We can only imagine a long processional dance alternating costumed dead and representative living, all accompanied by the instruments so often shown in the musical instruments, I should say, so often shown in the paintings. Here we see how animated those skeletons are compared to their partners. There's something innately transgressive about the pairing of living and dead in a dance. Next, please. Now, as with the living in the Dance of Death, dances among the blessed in heaven seem to date. And we can see at the top left here one illustration of that. Usually danced in a ring, with saints and angels dancing together. An example of an acceptable earthly dance is found on the bottom right here in the mid-14th century mural of good governance in the Palazzo Pubblico of Siena, where young people are dancing most decorously. There's certainly no ungainly leaping about here. In the Bible, we see both kinds of dancing, the sinful, as with Salome in the book of Matthew, and the joyful, which greeted Saul and David on their return from battle. Dancing could happen in heaven as a reward, top left, or in hell as a punishment. It seems there was much ambiguity about dance in the medieval period. It was expected in heaven. Marjorie Kemp, the early 15th century mystic, in her biography says, "I, that is Christ, shall take thee, that is Marjorie, on one hand in heaven and my mother on the other hand, and so shall dance in heaven with other holy maidens and virgins." And she also says, "Maidens dance now merrily in heaven. Shall I not do so?" However, to quote Jacques de Vitry in the mid-13th century, the dance is a circle whose centre is the devil. And again in the 15th century, a German preacher said, "There are above all three things with which the devil seduced men by using women: looking, talking, and touching. All three occur in dancing. They look at each other and wink with their eyes. There is indecent talk, gestures, and songs. The hands and the entire body are touched, which kindles and increases the fire of unchastity, to which many a virtuous child falls victim." Prohibitions against dancing in churchyards were enacted in the 13th and 14th centuries, leading to the logical conclusion that people must have danced in churchyards, although not certainly known why. So what do we believe? Is dancing good, or is it a cause of sin? So the dance is a combination of words, images, and performance to be understood by all. The death of the Book of Hours shown here is private. It's restricted to those with enough money to ensure access to a book, and to those who could read or has someone willing to read to them. On the few occasions when seen from the dance appear in Books of Hours, which were private devotional texts, they do not accompany the poem, but accompany the office of the dead. The dances performed may have been entertaining, but its primary function was didactic, to teach the necessity of setting one's life to rights. The dance would work for anyone, literate or not, rich or poor, whoever they were. They had access to the sermons read where the dance was. I'll say that again. They had access to the sermons read in the churches where the dance was depicted. It seems appropriate that this art form, which showed people of all kinds and statuses coming to their end, should be available to all. Death itself was a performative experience. It appeared in morality and miracle plays as a character on stage. It was found in the dance. Executions were very public affairs, and even the more everyday death of an old or ailing person was to be a semi-public event with priests, family, friends, and neighbours in attendance to ensure that everything was done properly. This last was fully described in the 14th and 15th century handbooks on dying. You could even get an idiot's guide on how to die. Thank you. It's certain we can use the act of dying at first hand once only. The dance of death gives us intimations of mortality. Death comes when we least expect it, and by then it's too late to change our fate. Fortunately for the late medieval Christian, there were handbooks on how to die, at peace with God, with a priest in attendance and family and friends around. The unexpected death, mors improvisa, was to be avoided at all costs, and this is what the dance shows. Since earthly life was only a precursor to the next and more important stage of existence, preparation to meet the gatekeeper was essential. Through preparation, time in purgatory could be shortened, hastening the time when the dying could dance again in heaven with the blessed. We'll leave our long line of cavorting cadavers with their reluctant partners dancing out of the 15th century and into the 16th when the dance nears its end. What better image to live with than our hero in the middle here, between two of his living victims, the clerk and the hermit, taking a final bow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. We got away with that, didn't we? And
I think it worked.
After my first nightmarish connection of slide, I think I established a smooth motion enough. It was really fascinating. Thank you. Got a couple of questions, and I was sick. Yeah. We had Charlotte with us, who is our dance historian. So Charlotte, you got a question now. I don't know if you want to unmute and ask.
I have unmuted. Jill, well done for you. It's just my own, have you found any specific descriptions of the movement? Obviously we have the iconography, we can discern a certain amount from that, but because I haven't found any, so I'm just wondering whether you have something missing in my research that could be found.
I wish.
Yeah.
I really wish I had, but no, absolutely nothing. Yeah. It's very sad, because I would love to have known actually what it looked like. I mean, wouldn't we all? Presume that's why we're here. I think it's so sad.
Well, I try and look from the positive glass half full of that. We do know that, like as you said, we do know that they did dance. And the fact that the church in particular complains so much about it and banned it left, right and centre, that we do know that it must have then happened. And things like...
Yes, absolutely.
It's just trying to unpick the... particularly the dance, because I'm not sure whether it actually was a dance or whether it was just a depiction of the transition between life and death. And but then again, whether things like the carol were then going to were part of some sort of ritualistic
well,
festival of death,
yes,
as there are in other cultures, which
well, there is definitely mention of a dance of death being performed at a court, and I can't remember whose court, in the 16th century, and I suspect Elena Gertzman mentions it in her book. Hang on, let me find the book. Not to look it up, but just to... There it is. If you really want to know almost everything there is to know about the dance, this is the book. It's by Elena Gertzman, and it's called The Dance of Death in the Middle Ages. It's wonderful. It's full of great information, some excellent illustrations as well. But even she says that we have no real detail of the actual performance. So perhaps, I think somebody once said to me they wanted to do a performance, but they couldn't find enough thin people to do the skeleton bit. It would be wonderful, wouldn't it? So, yeah, absolutely. And I'm not volunteering for that, certainly. But it would be great one day to try some kind of a recreation of what it might have looked like. We can only speculate, sadly.
That does answer a question from David, who said, would you recommend any book that studies the dance of death, in particular those that are heavily loaded with illustrations? So maybe, Natasha, you could put the author and title in the chat. That would be brilliant. I also like David's comment. I'll speak to you in a bit. I like David's comment. My sad old goth soul is in heaven right now.
Absolutely.
So we have some more questions. Let me just have a look.
Yes.
Yeah. Richard, do you feel like unmuting? Richard York, do you feel like unmuting and asking your question?
Yes, thank you. Hi. That was thoroughly enjoyable.
T-shirt.
Very proud of the T-shirt, which I got.
Yes. Appropriate T-shirt. Thank you.
Just noticing that quite a lot of the dead seem to be eviscerated. Is that? I assume that's the sort of crane-like thing at the front of it. Was this what they did before, or was it something special?
Well, in all the different iterations of the macabre arts in the period, it's a bit hit and miss. Sometimes the skeletons are eviscerated and sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they very definitely are, because you can see the end of the, is it their altar? You can see where it's been cut through and everything kind of scooped out. Yeah, it's odd. Some of the, if you really want good detail, you go and look at some transy tombs, because they are some of the most graphic representations of the dead from the 14th and 15th.
Please, I didn't quite hear the which tombs?
Transy tombs, Transi. There is I think the best one is the one of Alice Chaucer, Countess de la Pole in Ulm in Oxfordshire. This is the only woman that I've ever found. If you want to email me, Richard, I'll give you all the details. So have a look for transy tombs. There are, I think, 41 in England. Oh, there's one in Wales, 41 in Britain. So they're really worth looking at. Some of them have living on a top decker and the cadaver on a lower deck, and they're just, which Alice Chaucer has. They're really extraordinary things. And I've had, when I was doing my dissertation, I contacted a friend who's a forensic archaeologist, and I said, does this cadaver look like a real cadaver? She said, oh, absolutely. She said, I've dug up people who look exactly like that. A kind of natural mummification. Some are much less realistic and quite cartoony, but that one of, as I said, Alice Chaucer is, I was going to say lifelike, but you know what I mean. It's accurate. So yes, some are scooped out, eviscerated, and some aren't.
Marianne asks, Natasha, I think you probably will have done, being all Welsh and everything, but Marianne asks, have you seen the Mural of Death and the Gallant at Llancarfan Church, if I'm pronouncing that right?
No.
Oh, it sounds great.
No,
Marianne, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I do.
Are you there, Marianne? Well, I'll just say it, if I may. Death is pulling the gallant, a young man dressed in the latest fashion, out of the window towards the cemetery. And death is quite gruesome, with a large worm crawling through his rib cage. That does sound like one for you, Natasha.
Oh, they often are. I love the worms. We often get worms, toads, spiders, lizards, snakes. Llann Caravan, just making a quick note.
Carol,
yes.
Carol, Carol Davis, you were asking about Mexico. Do you feel like popping in and asking? Hello, Carol.
Yeah.
Hello, it's Gwilym actually. Who's
is it Gwilym? Oh, okay. Masquerading as Carol.
Well, hello, both of you, anyway.
Well, the question is really in the chat that there are present-day customs such as Halloween, All Hallows around that, and there's also foreign customs such as the Mexican Dia de los Muertos, and I think there's something similar in Catalonia, Dia de los Morts or something.
Indeed, there is.
Is there a relation, or is it just sort of coincidence? Direct line, or what?
I suspect there is a connection. One day I would like to create a whole sort of family tree of death, because, as I said, my work is very firmly focused around late medieval Europe. But I strongly suspect there is a connection, and also with the St. Vitus dance and the Tarantella in Italy. I suspect all these things, you could make a brilliant family tree of them. I don't know what the direct connection is, but I suspect, especially in Latin America, it's been brought over from Spain, presumably Portugal, that kind of area.
So
I know very little American generally.
So that's your next thesis,
Yes,
then?
I'm sure there's a connection. No. Thesis is symbolism in tombs. So I'm still sticking with Europe. I really only do medieval, so I'm not going to start learning about other stuff at my great age.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yes, I'm sure it's connected.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Natasha. It was absolutely fascinating. And I hope that maybe we can come back to it next year's Medieval Music in the Dales. You know, you might have, feed in some of your, your ongoing research or whatever. And I particularly think that you and Charlotte need to get together and think about a representation of the Dance of Death.
Yeah, I think it would be wonderful too.
That would be brilliant.
I'd probably only be fit to play the old woman, but I'd be very pleased.
I'm up for that, Jill.
Yay!
Okay.
And David,
you're on, Charlotte.
David, you are skinny enough to be a skeleton as well, so
There we go. Yeah.
We've got it going on. Thank you so much, Natasha.
And we promise not to eviscerate anyone. No, thank you, Jill. Thanks for asking me. See you all soon.
Thanks for coping as well. Bye for now. Bye.